Hello, welcome to December's Inspire Book Club. This month we are reading The Wild Laughter by Caoilinn Hughes, which on the back it says it's 2008 and the Celtic tiger has left devastation in its wake. Brothers Hart and Cormac Black are waking up to a very different island, one that widens the chasm between them and brings their beloved father to his knees. Facing a devastating choice that put their livelihood, even their lives on the line, the brothers soon learn that the biggest danger comes when there's nothing to lose. And I think first sort of point, I think it was a very thought-provoking book. There's a lot of themes in it that made you sort of question some of your own thinking. I don't know if that's anything that anyone else would agree with.
Yeah, definitely.
It definitely made me sort of question and evaluate some of like your views on things. From a personal point of view, I grew up in the Catholic Church, so sort of all the elements of religion on sort of in suicide and euthanasia were sort of things that I know I sort of I heard like the Catholic side of it when I was growing up, but also had my own sort of moral compass coming through as I got older. Eventually left the church, but that's a different story. Don't know if anyone else has any thoughts.
Yeah, I felt it was well written, and I felt it was dealing with some very important issues, but I felt it was a bit light in terms of the actual plot. There wasn't a lot of narrative drive to it, but it kept me going because I listened to the audiobook and it was just so beautifully read by Chris O'Dowd. I couldn't put it down. I just loved it, probably mainly for that reason, but I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I also enjoyed the book, actually. I read the book and I think it benefited actually from being, for me, from being quite a short book. I wouldn't have wanted to read it as a blockbuster 500-page book. I don't know, 200 pages, because I read the ebooks. It's hard to judge how big it is. I reckon they put 200 printed pages. But you're right, it deals with some pretty grim things, betrayal, obviously assisted suicide. It's really quite a grim read, really. But I did really enjoy it. I don't think it challenged what I thought in any way, because I think in some ways the book kind of supported probably to a degree possibly what I think it kind of comes out saying it's assisted suicide is probably what they did was correct, but obviously they are punished for it. So it's a really hard thing to say whether it. I don't know.
So it makes you consider the moral dilemma.
There's certainly a moral dilemma there. It's a dilemma that I don't think anyone ever wants to be in.
I think a bigger theme for me really was the sibling rivalry, and this idea that one brother is going off and doing his degree and very financially successful, and the other's sort of marooned on this loss-making farm, and is classed as the sort of dimwit one. And then ends up taking the rap for the assisted suicide. And I don't know if there's a kind of biblical Cain and Abel type reference or anything there. But I felt the sibling rivalry in some ways for me was the main theme of the novel, and the way I thought the best written sequence was when he went off to town and actually got off with his brother's girlfriend, who was an actress, and I thought that was really engaging and interestingly written, and I enjoyed their relationship. And when that tailed off, I thought the whole story sort of nosedived, really. The family went off to some caravan on the coast, and nothing much happened, and what was happened was pretty grim. Was pretty grim, and I thought, the story really got stuck in the, well, let's say mud at that point, and it didn't really pick up after that. Even though the actress character did reappear briefly, there was nothing really of interest happening. and I thought the whole court case thing was a bit boring too. So it sort of started interestingly and then peaked and then tailed off from there, I felt.
I suppose there's an element, isn't there, in like obviously went off to the caravan, and that's when obviously they got into the suicide part of it, and then from that point I suppose he was in a sort of depression, alcoholism, drinking all the time. So I suppose in terms of the plot and everything, nothing was happening at that point because he was stagnant. He was just in this sort of murky area where he wasn't human in some way at that point. Like he'd lost himself. Don't know. Have you got any comments you want to say, Anne? We've not heard from you much yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a beautifully written book and quite easy to read. I have to say I didn't enjoy it, unlike people. I think it was just so depressing. I think maybe I thought up to about half, 2/3 that there was something else was going to come in, and then I realised it was just going to be about the death and the assisted suicide and events after. And so that made me feel even more depressed because there seemed to be, I agree with Ian about the plot was not, amazing. I hadn't thought about it in terms of it going down after where they go off and to wherever it is and have a slightly happier time. But I think, yes, that's probably right on reflection. I don't know. I was a bit mixed about it. I was quite glad to finish because I wasn't terribly enjoying it. I thought, well, I've got there, I have finished.
You're saying it wasn't particularly easy to read. It was quite depressing, but I think there was sort of elements in the writing that sort of kept you intrigued sometimes to read it, and it wasn't hard to read in terms of like how it was written. It was quite easy to carry on read the next chapter, particularly because of the short little chapters. You never felt like, oh, I've read that one, I need to put it down. It was.
No, I agree. But it was easy to read it at that level. In terms of what he was saying, it wasn't particularly easy to read because you just thought, do I really want to read this? But then that's why I want to read these sort of books. Not just going for the easy escapism.
Ian commented slightly on like the family is sort of like the brothers and their sort of sibling rivalry going on. I think like the family dynamics are quite an interesting area in the book. In that Hart seemed to really like his father, didn't he? He was obviously I think maybe he was his father's son, but Cormac was his mother's son in some ways, and that Cormac did seem to have more of a relationship with the mum, because we were reading it from Hart's point of view, and he's the narrator, so we didn't get to know the mum very well because she wasn't in his world in the same way.
It's interesting. I mean, you only slowly, as you progress in the book, discover who everybody is, and you don't discover who Hart is straight away by any means. You discover he's a child of parents, but not in terms of other relationships. And for quite a while, I thought he was a girl. It didn't come out until he got into it that he was actually a brother, not a sister. In all the early part, or very early part, he seemed to me like a younger sister. And then I realised obviously he wasn't, he was a younger brother. But I thought it was quite skillful. I don't know how deliberate it was, the way it only slowly emerged who he was, even who he was within the family, let alone who he was, what he was like. Anyway, I don't know if that struck anybody else, or just me.
I thought it was interesting that this Hart character was supposed to be, or he portrays himself as being a bit of a failure at school and a bit of a dimwit, and yet he's so articulate in his narration. And when he goes off to meet his brother and these two actresses, he talks very knowledgeably about plays and literature, and whether we were meant to be surprised by that and think, oh, actually, he's just as intelligent as his brother, but he hasn't had the opportunity to pursue that, or whether it's just a failure in the writing. I don't know, but he just struck me as probably being a more rounded and intelligent character and personality than his supposedly successful super brother. And it didn't quite ring true. Whether that was deliberate, I don't know.
I don't think his family let him be everything that he wanted to be. Like he was talking about like wanting to travel, didn't he? And they kept shooting down his ideas. Why would you want to do that? You've got Ireland here. And there might be an element of the elder brother went off to university and's got a job, but one of you needs to stay here and look after the farm because we know this is a family business. You need to keep in this area.
There was definitely a favourite son, wasn't there? You know, they were definitely there was no hiding the fact that what was he called? Connor. Cormac was the favoured son. You know, they made no. You know, they made literally no kind of disguise of that. You know, and it could just come down to kind of confidence.
Or even to his last words, wasn't it?
Yeah.
My clever son was the dad's last word. So
yes, that was quite telling, wasn't it?
Yeah. So, I think there was kind of wanting to stay, potentially to have that kind of prove himself to the parents, but it was clearly never going to happen, was it? Although, as you say, he wasn't a dimwit.
He wasn't, no, and he was physically more attractive. In fact, he probably was the potentially most successful of the two, and yet he was just sort of completely stunted by his lack of opportunity and his filial obligation that, as you say, somebody's got to stay and look after the farm and dig up the turnips and what have you.
He did have the bit though, where when the dad was giving him the will, wasn't he? He was saying that there should be some money and you can go and do a tourism thing, and then at least you can travel. It's not just for girls now. So maybe there was a part where the dad sort of relented and saw that this wasn't what he wanted.
But was there really any money? There were sort of.
Was, but no. The dad had the idea at least.
Yeah.
You also had the bit where Nora, the mum, obviously she threw him under the bus at the end, didn't she, in the court scenes? Like, I've got all this extra evidence. Instead of trying to get both of her sons off so that they could at least have a life, she's like, no, you can go to prison so I can be safe and my other son, which, says a lot about their familiar relationships, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that was awful, wasn't it? To throw your son underneath the sort of, and then for him to do this, to continue those kind of bonds again, to take the rap, it was again
you're saying about like there not being a lot of sort of plot in it. It's sort of obviously a lot more like character led, isn't it? But then it wasn't. I didn't think there was a lot of character development in terms of like people sort of having any revelations and moving on and sort of things. You get slowly further and further into this sort of like snowball of like hopelessness.
Yeah, I think we sort of got that hint that there might be a way out for him when he met the actress, and I felt that that was probably his first realization that he had more potential than his brother. But it came to nothing. Whether in the future, I mean, possibly you feel that there might be an opportunity for him to get out of prison and live his own life eventually. But there's no real indication that that's an option or a possibility.
Sort of, and there's like a reveal that he's, like possibly got a daughter as well at the end, where it was a bit like, I don't know, sort of missed opportunity, isn't it? That he sort of could have had this world, and then he's like,
it's not another thing that his brother's taken away from him, though, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
It's
more depression, wasn't it? Really, it was more lost opportunity, more kind of, it was quite a depressing book, actually.
It's sort of like all the characters are sort of flawed, like they weren't particularly likable, but sort of as you went through, I felt for them. Like they're obviously stuck in a time and a place where they couldn't get out of things, and this was what was expected. Not necessarily Cormac, because he was off doing whatever he wanted, making money, showing off. But like, I think even that the dad sort of had elements where you sort of resounded to like being, I've got to look after the farm, I've got to pass it on. Whereas I don't think anyone really questioned whether they wanted to be doing anything. But that's sort of family ties, isn't it? Right. My notes are really chaotic, so I can't work out where anything is. But if you've got any other points.
I think we've wanted to have mentioned that it wasn't humorous, but I think there was humour in it. Particularly the interrogation by the Irish detective. There was quite a lot of that was quite a funny scene, really. The way, you know, the sort of, I can't think exactly what happened, but there were quite a lot of misunderstandings and misconceptions, and I thought that was quite a good humorous comic scene, actually.
I think that might be the part where you listen rather than we read, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So you had sort of,
yeah, because I've got the different accents and the sort of way. I mean, obviously he's a comic actor, and he delivered that superbly, and the humour really came out of that, actually. And there were one or two other scenes where there was humour, but possibly the way he presented it revealed that humour much better than you would get from just reading it.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, one of the critics' comments that you just see over the cover and things said hilariously funny. I mean, I agree there was humour in it, but I would never have described it as hilariously funny.
No.
But yeah, I agree there was humour. And I can see it would have come out better listening to it rather than reading it.
Yeah, and it's a lot of dark humour as well, which, you know, you may or may not find funny. So I think it's wrong to say that there was no humour in it. I think there was quite a lot of humour and irony and dark humour, but hilarious doesn't quite.
No, it doesn't.
No, it's actually quite an inappropriate word, really. I think. It completely missells the book. But yeah, that quote you mentioned there, Anne, was the one I really kind of like. I just was like, it's hilariously funny. It just wasn't. But I mean, I do think what you say though, Ian, about the audio book. I think, you know, Chris O'Dowd is a, you know, massively talented, you know, comedic actor, and, you know, and I imagine his delivery on different voices were, you know,
it really
timing
was.
and his plotting, you know, the timing of the wording and the sense could make a huge difference. But
it was so spot on. It was so good, and that's why I enjoyed it, I suppose, because I agree with all your negative comments, but I still loved it.
I enjoyed reading it, but I didn't enjoy elements. Like, I don't know, it's hard to say you enjoyed it when it was so dark. It's sort of not like the right word. I don't know what the right word is, so it's sort of like, so like it was not easy to read thematically, but the writing made me enjoy reading it. So saying about the humour, I mean, it is called The Wild Laughter. So they reference that, which I found out comes from Shakespeare's Love's Labour's Lost. I don't know.
Right. I did wonder about that title. Yeah. Is it ironic?
They reference like the wild laughter in it, and then when I was doing a little bit of research just to sort of get some points to talk about, there was something in there where it was where did I put that bit? I don't know now. Oh, it's like a coping mechanism. So like in, you know, all the depth of like, you know, this impending sort of death and sort of the dad deteriorating, it's the elements of laughter and the ridiculousness of some of the parts of it. It's sort of a coping mechanism. I suppose if we don't laugh, we'll cry, sort of part of it.
Yeah.
Hysteria, really. Yeah. I was absolutely convinced the author was male, actually, because I thought it was like Caoilinn Hughes, and not having had any blurb or any kind of introduction, and it being read by a male and narrated by a male. It wasn't until afterwards, when I was just reading some of, I don't know, I was just sort of looking online, I think, and realised the author was female. I would never have guessed that from my experience of that book and the characters that she created.
they felt very real, didn't they? They felt very much like, well, the men in their 20s especially felt very much like men in their 20s, and the way that they approached and spoke to each other. So there's someone that is researched and, you know, tried to make sure that they seem realistic.
Yeah, yeah. And the female characters were all quite sort of one-dimensional, really. The mother and the actresses. So they weren't really developed at all. Yeah. So
it was almost, you know, in TV terms, it was an ensemble cast of maybe there's only really 3 or 4 people who actually get any sort of any kind of anything in the book. Really, it's very much it's almost a two-hander, isn't it? Really,
I suppose that comes back to it being from Hart's perspective. He's the narrator, and there's not many people in his world, is it? He's quite isolated. He only had his dad and his brother and his mum, really, in terms of people that he saw on a day-to-day basis. So his world was very small.
Yeah.
Well, I think I've gone through just about all of my notes. I don't know if anyone else has got anything they'd like to add.
No, I think
she's published another book, hasn't she? I think she's got another one out.
I think this one was a second novel, so there's one before.
There's one before. What's the right?
Before,
Right. I knew. I had a feeling there was another one out. You haven't looked at that, I suppose. No.
I haven't read it. No, I wouldn't be opposed to having a look and seeing what it's about.
I'd certainly have a look at the book, particularly if it was short like this one. You know, that always
like
makes me far more open to giving a book a try if I think, that's
quite nice. Like a 200-page book sometimes, especially when you're in a bit of a reading lull. You can sort of like pull you out of that.
Yeah.
I don't know. If we've not got any other comments we want to add, I'd say we're probably about finished.
Do we need to give it our score out of 5?
Want to give it a score?
Yeah.
I think it's quite hard to do. I think in terms of like enjoying it and like the writing and everything, I probably would give it 4 out of 5. I don't know.
I'd give it a 4 because I enjoyed listening to it so much, really. That's more of a 4 for Chris O'Dowd, I suppose, but I would give it a 4.
I don't think I'd give it more than 3.
Okay.
Just too depressing.
I think I'd probably give it a 4, but I can't say. I'm not sure I'd recommend it to people because I'm not sure it's.
You have to recommend it with a sort of. But it's a bit like this.
Yeah. But it's definitely a good read, and I think you know, I did enjoy it.
Yeah, it's just a mixed sort of themes, but the writing and all that sort of element.
It's not a hand in the air,
No, it's not. This is one of my favourite books ever.
Considered for,
but it is well written. So yeah. All right, thank you.